This week is the Parsha of Seitzei. Today we will be exploring a fascinating mitzvah, in fact several of them, which revolve around the concept of forbidden mixtures. And that is, we learn in the Parsha about the Torah's command, which forbids one to crossbreed, whether it is seeds, which is known as kilayim. It is forbidden to hybridize, to crossbreed animals. In fact, even for a ox and a donkey to plow together, it is forbidden. As well as shatnez, to have a garment which is a mixture of wool and linen together. Which is interesting because, generally speaking, when it comes to prohibitions, foods that are forbidden to eat, or actions that are forbidden, the action or the food is inherently forbidden. Whereas in this instance, you have something that is, on its own right, it's permissible. In fact, we have another forbidden mixture, which we're very familiar with, and that is, it's not in this parsha, but it's in the parsha of Mishpatim, basar b'chalav, mixing milk and meat together, which each in its own right is permissible. In fact, in many instances, it's a mitzvah. If you were to eat a piece of meat on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, that would be a mitzvah. If you have a piece of cheesecake on Shavuos, it's a great thing. It's a custom to eat dairy foods on that Yom Tov. However, when you have the mixture of the meat and the milk together, it transforms into a prohibited food. And the same is with the wool and the linen, the ox and the donkey. Each on its own right are permissible, but somehow when they are mixed together, it becomes forbidden. So today we're going to explore this phenomenon on various levels. In fact, the commentators note that the scope of the prohibition is such that it covers various areas in life, whether, as the Bachaye and others say, that it covers matters that are connected to the earth, such as the kilayim, the crossbreeding of seeds, or it covers as well in the animal realm, such as we mentioned before, the crossbreeding animals and the plowing together, and in garments, which is the shatnez, or as some classify it, the realm of domim, tzomeach, and chai, the domim, the inanimate, and the tzomeach, that which grows, so basar b'chalav, and as well as tzomeach is the crossbreeding of the seeds, the kilayim, as well as chai in the animal kingdom, crossbreeding animals. So what exactly is the problem here? Now, it's brought down that some of these are considered a chok, a super rational law. So whether it is shatnez, is something that is not something that we're able to understand. However, there is a notion in Jewish thought that even if there is a category of commandments which would seem illogical, nevertheless, we have to try to delve into the deep spiritual underpinnings of each mitzvah and try to glean some lesson or some insight, some spiritual insight that could guide us in our lives. In fact, the Rebbe points out the prohibition of basar and chalav, the mixture of milk and meat, is stated in the parsha of Mishpatim, which Mishpatim are the categories of laws that are intuitive, that even if the Torah wasn't given, it's something that we would naturally gravitate to. So certainly there's something in this mitzvah that we could appreciate. Now, the Nachmanides, the Ramban, explains that in the instance of basar b'chalav, the milk and meat, there's an element of cruelty, ruthlessness, because the milk, in the words of the Torah, lo savashal gedi b'chalevima, you should not cook the kid in the milk of its mother. So here you have the mother and the milk, which is the symbol of the vitality of this of life and sustenance, and to cook the kid the goat in that milk is a particularly cruel thing to do. And similarly, other commentators explain in connection with the plowing of the animals, the crossbreeding of the animals when they are plowing together, the ox and the donkey, that's also, there's an element of tsar b'li-chayim, cruelty to the animals, which is variously explained according to various commentators. Some say it's because fundamentally, since they are two different animals, animals naturally like to socialize, to hang out with their own species, with their own kind. To work side by side with another is something that's very agitating to them. Or as some explain, when the ox is constantly chewing its cud, while it's plowing, it's something that will distress the donkey that's plowing alongside with it, because it thinks it's constantly eating, although it's just regurgitating its cud. Or another opinion that explains that the ox and the donkey, they plow at a different pace. Their disposition, their character, their nature is very different. The ox is more aggressive. The donkey is more passive and docile in comparison to the ox, and therefore when they're plowing together, they're not going to be on the same pace. They're not going to be on the same page, and therefore it's going to be a source of anguish and distress for the donkey. In any case, we see this concept of tsar b'li-chayim, which we know is a critical component in Jewish law. We know the various stories that's brought in the Talmud about Rebbe, the great teacher and the one who codified the Mishnah, or Yehuda Hanasi. He suffered for 13 years. The Talmud in Baba Metzia tells us the story. He suffered for 13 years with stomach ailments because of an insensitivity to an animal. As once there was a calf that was being led to slaughter, and it ran into the folds of the coat of Rebbe, and he said, "Go along. This is what you were created for." And in heavens, it was decided that since he showed an insensitivity to animals, it was decreed that he would suffer, and he did for many, many years. It was only many years later that there was once the maid was sweeping up, and there were some weasels over there, and he said, "Let them be. V'rachamav al kol masav. You should have compassion on all of Hashem's creations." It was decided that since he was compassionate, they would be compassionate with him as well. So, being sensitive and compassionate to animals is an important principle in Jewish thought. We know, especially the Moshe Rabbeinu, he was chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people, and the Medrash famously tells us about the story how there was one. Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd, and there was one little sheep that ran away from the flock, from the herd. And Moshe Rabbeinu, when he chases after it, he sees it goes to this little brook and it's drinking from the water. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, "I didn't realize that you were thirsty and that's why you ran away." And he picks up this sheep and puts it on his shoulder and walks it back to the flock, to the herd. And it was decided, since he showed such kindness and sensitivity to an individual sheep, this was the hallmark of what it means to be a Jewish leader. So certainly we see this concept of tsar b'li-chayim, compassion and empathy for animals is very important. However, this doesn't explain the full range of all of the forbidden mixtures. This would explain perhaps the rationale to basar b'chalav, milk and meat, to the prohibition of plowing the two animals, the ox and the donkey, together. However, there are other forbidden mixtures. As we mentioned before, the crossbreeding of the seeds, the kalayim, shatnez, mixture of wool and linen together, that would not explain that prohibition. In fact, there's another interesting question here, because we know that in this week's parsha we read how when it talks about the prohibition of shatnez, it says that you're not allowed to have wear a garment that has the mixture of wool and linen together. And in the same verse it says you should make Gedilim tasalacha, you should make tzitzis, which our rabbis extrapolate from here that in the instance where a person were to wear a garment with the tzitzis and there was shatnez, it would be permissible. And moreover, in the temple where the Kohen and the priest would wear the priestly garments, so the part of the avnei, part of the garments had a mixture of shatnez, wool and linen, mixed into it together, which teaches us an interesting point that there is a certain scenario where shatnez is permissible. In fact, in a certain instance, it is mandated. So what's the difference? If it is fundamentally prohibited, if there's something wrong here, why is it permissible in the instance of the big day kohuna, the priestly garments, or in the case of tzitzis? Although in the case of tzitzis, the rabbis tell us that we should not use a garment that has wool and linen mixed into it, because one of the reasons is for the concern that in the nighttime, since it's many say that it's not the time of tzitzis, it's not the mitzvah, therefore you should not wear it, because then you'd be wearing a shatnez garment without the mitzvah, and therefore the mitzvah of the tzitzis would not override the prohibition of shatnez. In any case, but we do know certainly in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, when they would wear the garments, they would have shatnez in there. So this really forces us to think about the whole concept of the shatnez and the hybridization, the crossbreeding, as something that is a fundamental concept in Torah and in Jewish thought, where the mixture itself here is problematic. So that's what we're going to touch on right now. So in general, in the commentators, there are two basic streams, there are two basic approaches to understanding this notion of the forbidden mixture. What is so terrible? On one level, it is explained that the concept of kilayim, this crossbreeding, the problem stems from the fact that there are two forces. There is the positive force, the good force, and there is the negative, the unholy. It is the mixture, it is the combination of the two which are inherently and fundamentally incompatible. That is the problem with kilayim. There's the ruach tov, there's the ruach ra, and when these are brought together, it makes an unholy and problematic combination, mixture. That's one explanation that's brought. Another explanation that's brought, and this the Rebbe touches this on this concept in various sichos, various talks, and it's based on the comment of the explanation of the Bachaye and the Ramban. And here, it's not the mixture of the negative force and the positive force. It's in fact the mere fact that there are two forces that are being mixed together. That itself is a problem. What it means like this. We know if we look at these forbidden mixtures, we'll talk about the shatnez. Shatnez, you have wool and you have linen. The color of wool is white, and the linen, which is made from the flax seed, the stalks are red. So it's white, you have white and red. In the Kabbalistic terminology and thought, the color of white is associated with chesed, with the spiritual and supernal attribute of kindness and benevolence. Whereas red is associated with gevura, severity, restraint, and judgment. And the same is when we look at the other forbidden mixtures, you have this dynamic. So in the context of basar and chalav, milk and meat, the chalav, the milk is white, basar is red. And over here, it's not just in the colors, it's also in the texture. Whereas the basar, the meat, is tough and solid, the milk is soft and flowing, which the milk, which the flowing is symbolic of sharing, of cultivation, of nurturing, giving life. The red meat is tough and hard. So instead of the sharing character, it actually has the element of being self-preservant, something that is self-contained, self-contained, and therefore it is the concept of gvura, which is about boundaries and restraint. The same is as well explained in connection with the shor and the chamor in the plowing scenario, where the ox is more aggressive, agitated. The donkey, by comparison, is a lot more calm and serene. So the shor, the ox, is associated with gevura, with strength, and the donkey would more closely align with chesed, with kindness. So we have from all of this, there's a common denominator here. All of these mixtures, we see this merger of chesed and gevura, kindness and severity. And indeed, this is something that runs through all of creation. Hashem created the world with two general forces and powers. Chesed, which is about kindness, benevolence, and sustaining, vitalizing everything in life. And gvura is judgment and restraint. And this impacts our very makeup, our very character, the type of person who we are. Some who are more outgoing, gregarious, generous. Others are more frugal, more reserved. These are pretty much manifestations. And everyone has, of course, a different balance and a different equilibrium, but you have these two forces of chesed and gvura in our lives. And what happens here is, Kabbalah says, when we mix the two, the chesed and gvura together, that creates a problematic combination. Because what's the problem here? So a few things happen. When you combine two forces which are incompatible, chesed and gvura are diametrically opposed. So when you bring these two forces together, one of two things could happen. Since they are opposites, they can't really combine. So either one will neutralize or obliterate the other, or they will be in a state of constant conflict. Because if you have chesed and you have gvura, each one with its own character and its own identity, how can chesed and gvura coexist? Either the chesed overpowers the gvura overpowers the chesed, and then there's only one dominant identity, only one dominant character trait. Or one does not dominate, they both don't overpower the other, and therefore chesed and gvura are constantly clashing one against the other. That's two scenarios. And then there's a third scenario, where the chesed and gvura, they come together in the sense that you don't have now either chesed, either gvura. They merge to the extent that you have a totally new entity that is neither chesed and neither gvura. And these different scenarios manifest themselves in these different forbidden mixtures. In the case of crossbreeding animals, you take an ox and a donkey, and they crossbreed, and then now a new animal is born. It is not a donkey, it is not an ox, it is something completely different. What's the problem here? Ramban explains that Hashem created the world in a way that everything has its identity, its boundary, its border. And he wanted it that way. He created everything with a very specific individual identity. He does not want us to obliterate these boundaries and these borders and identities to create something different. Because although unity and camaraderie is a very positive thing, that is only so long as each party is able to retain their unique identity. When you start blurring the boundaries, now what you're doing right now is something that's undermining the very constitution of the creation of this world. So what happens here is when you have two animals that mate together that are of two different species, and you're creating a new entity, what you have done is you have thoroughly merged these two different parties to the extent that it has infiltrated to the very core of their existence. How do we see that? Because the reproductive power has been transformed to create an entity that is neither one of its parents. So this, the Ramban explains, undermines the very creation of this world, the very intent of what Hashem had in mind when Hashem created the world in the 6 days of creation. So this is the most severe and grave forbidden mixture, which the union brings about a totally new alien identity. This hybrid creature is something that undermines the very will of Hashem and frustrates, really, the very purpose of creation. But then there's another kind of unity. You have the union of shatnez, or where you have the mixture of wool and linen. Here, the wool and linen are woven together in a garment. What's happening here is, yes, they are next to each other, they are woven together, but it's not like that the wool or the linen have truly become one. They are neighbors, so to speak. They are woven next to each other, so the materials are near each other, but each one retains its own identity. Here, what's happening is the wool does not become linen, the linen doesn't become wool. Each one is there and retains its identity. However, it's in a state of clash, of conflict, because it's not like one gives room for the other. So here you have the other extreme, not like where the hybrid of animals, where it's a totally new entity which combines both of the parents. Here, in the case of the wool and the linen, it is neither. Neither the wool is becoming the linen is not becoming the wool. There is no unity. It's just in a state of conflict, a state of strife, and therefore the Torah says this is an unhealthy relationship as well. The same is in the case of the plowing of the animals, the ox and the donkey. Even though there are many explanations why the plowing together is forbidden, some say because if they plow together, it will ultimately result in the breeding of the animals together. But the Torah clearly prohibits the plowing in and of itself. And here as well, the ox and the donkey are not unifying, they're not becoming one. They are merely two opposites that are going to be in a state of struggle. Now, basar b'chalav is an interesting distinction, because we will address it soon. It is, in a way, if we were to think about it, is the basar b'chalav, the mixture of milk and meat, would we say it's more similar to the case of the hybrid animals? Because we know that the Torah says you need to cook the milk and meat together. Have they truly become one? Is it like a hybrid animal where you have the crossbreeding reproduces a alien and new entity that is neither an ox, neither a donkey? Is that the case of basar b'chalav, milk and meat? Or is it more akin, is it more similar to shatnez? Because at the end of the day, the milk, in the case of shatnez, the linen and the wool have not merged to become one entity, one identity. The milk and the meat as well, have they retained its own properties, its own distinction? We'll address that in a moment. First, I want to ask a question, because you're probably all thinking, this whole concept of forbidding the mixture of chesed and gevura, you're going to ask yourself, hang on a second. We all know it is a very, very important principle in the Torah, the concept of unity, the concept of peace. The Torah was given to promote peace in the world. There's a concept called, in Hasidic and Kabbalistic thought, hiskalalus, inclusivity, to encompass. Isn't it proper that various parties should come together in unison. In fact, as the Rebbe says, there's the Chazal tell us an important principle in life. La'olam yehei adam rach kekana v'al yeh kashe ka'eres. A person should be pliant, should be flexible like a reed, and not stiff and stubborn as a cedar is strong and unbendable. Which one of the ideas behind this statement of our sages is that we should all try to be flexible. Even if our disposition is chesed, kindness, we should be soft and flexible in life to allow ourselves to accommodate a person who may be more gevura oriented, somebody who is more unflinching and judgmental. If we are going to dig our heels in and not accommodate others, we will not be able to live and coexist with each other harmoniously. So if so, why does the Torah forbid this concept of... Now, if you're going to say the problem with the forbidden mixtures is because you're mixing holiness and unholiness, purity and impurity, I can understand why that mixture is forbidden. That's one explanation. But if the explanation is that the very mixture of chesed and gevura is problematic, so why has the Torah forbidden that? Seemingly, it's actually a fundamental principle in the Torah. To the extent that it's brought down that this mixture is problematic, that the Bachaya says that the irvuv hakochos, as he calls it, creates a harm in the spiritual realms, in the realms here in this physical terrestrial world. In fact, it's brought even in halacha, the concept that we should not... The Alter Rebbe writes in the Shulchan Aruch that a person should not interlock their fingers together because it causes a din, a supernal judgment upon the person. And it's brought down, there are those have the custom in the Hasidic circles, when they button the right, their button, the right should be over the left, not the left over the right, because the left symbolizes gevura, and we want that the kindness should overpower the gevura, the judgment, and not the other way around. It's brought down, the Alter Rebbe once said about the Maggid, his teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich, who was known that his left foot was lame, and it was a little bit, when he would always dragging the foot, and he explained that the reason why here in this physical world there was an ailment in his left foot was in order to weaken the force of gevura, the forces of judgment and severity in this world. So, why is that? Why do we find that there is a problem with mixing these two forces? It could be even in the realm of holiness, and it's still problematic. In fact, it's brought in Chassidus and in Kabbalah that the concept of mixing the wool and linen together goes all the way back to the time of Cain and Hevel, which we know that when they brought their offerings, their sacrifice, Hevel, he brought the offering of sheep, and Cain brought an offering from flax, and Hevel, his offering was from the choicest, the superior, it was a superior offering, whereas Cain brought something that was more inferior. And it's explained that the Cain and Hevel, how did that clash, how did that conflict result in murder? Because Hevel brought the offering from the realm of Chai, of the animal kingdom, and Cain brought an offering from Tzomeach, from the realm, the kingdom of vegetation. And those two cannot coexist. So what's the explanation? Why is that problematic? So the Rebbe explains, and it's based on the teachings of the Tzemach Tzedek, an interesting concept. And that is, when do we say that inclusivity, to encompass another person or another midah, another attribute, it only works in, number one, in the context of Kedusha. That means like this. when I say that I want to unite with you, or one midah, one attribute should be accommodating to another, that's only if they're on the same page. Which means, if, as we mentioned before, if unity is about, yes, if you get along with me and you learn to look up to me and worship me and idealize me, and you nullify yourself to me, then you could get along with me. That's not true unity. It is only when two parties are able to retain their individuality, their identity, and merge together, then it could happen. But how can two different, disparate, and diametrically opposite attitudes, opinions, dispositions, how can they really unite if they're truly in conflict? The answer is only if there is a common higher purpose. As explained, the example that's given in Chassidus is you have a king. A king has a cabinet of ministers, and each minister has their own portfolio, they have their own responsibilities, and they have their own agendas. And oftentimes they could be in conflict with each other. So how do they both unite? How do they coalesce to work along with each other? It's only because they realize that each minister is not there to serve his own agenda, his own purpose. They're there to serve the king and his agenda. So therefore, they come to the realization that, yes, I might be the minister of finance, you might be the minister of agriculture or defense or health. And even though sometimes, as we see in today's society and in the times that we're living in, if you talk about health and you talk about economy, sometimes these two agendas seem to be mutually exclusive. Some say if we want to promote health, we need to lock everybody down. They need to stay in their home, and that's how everyone will be able to stop the spread of this virus, and everyone will be safe. And the economic argument says, no, if you're going to do that, people will lose their jobs, the economy will grind to a halt, and everyone's going to suffer. So these are two agendas, and they seem to be mutually exclusive. So how do you reconcile them? When you come to the realization that each one is not just there to serve their own purpose, they're here to serve a higher purpose. They're here to serve the king. They're here to serve the country. So then they come to the realization that just like the minister of health wants to serve the king, the minister of the economy wants to do the same. And therefore, they're not working against each other, they're actually working for each other. But that can only happen in the realm and context of Kedusha. Because Kedusha, as the Tzemach Tzedek says, everything is what he calls min b'minoi. Everything is identical. We're all here because Hashem, in the context of Kedusha, everything is batul to Hashem. Everything is nullified to a higher agenda. No one has their own agenda. They're only there to serve Hashem. And therefore, they could all get along with each other, even though they individually are separate, disparate, and in fact opposites. However, when it comes to the realm of impurity or the outside the realm of holiness, here everything is not about who they can help. It's not as idealistic. It's not as altruistic. It's all about self-aggrandizement, self-preservation, self-enhancement. And therefore, everything in this world is self-serving. And therefore, indeed, to serve myself and to enhance my life and enrich my experience, it may come at the expense of somebody else who has their own agenda, who wants to do the exact same thing. And inevitably, these two interests will not align. They will clash and be in state of conflict. But it's important to understand, when we go back to the realm of Kedusha, when you have these two ministers, you have these people who have two different agendas, but they're here to serve the king. It's not like, as it's explained, it says, Osa Shalom ben Romav, we say that Hashem, he makes peace in his heavens. What kind of peace? What kind of conflict is there? So it's explained that there are different angels. You have Gavriel, you have Michal. One is the Sar Shalmayim, is the minister the agent of water, and one is the Sar, he is the minister of Eish. And seemingly fire and water are incompatible. They are opposites. Seemingly one should extinguish the other. But in the heavens, Michal, Gavriel, they do not diminish, they do not extinguish one of the other. Why is that? Because they're there at the service and serve at the pleasure of Hashem. Their whole agenda is about serving Hashem. But what happens is, it's not like the Gavriel ceases to be Gavriel and Michal ceases to be Michal, and that's why they can get along. No. Michal remains Michal, Gavriel remains Gavriel. And nevertheless, they do not extinguish each other. They do not obliterate. It's not a situation of mutually assured destruction, because it's in the realm of Kedusha. So now we could go back to understand, why is it that shatnez and milk and meat, it doesn't work? Yes, one may represent chesed, one may represent gevura. However, just merely the fact that one is chesed and gevura, we say, unite, come together, be in a state of peace. True peace doesn't mean I can get along with you as long as you surrender and as long as you have no agenda and anything that you need is on my terms. Of course, that's a one-sided peace. That's not true harmony. That's not real compromise. And therefore, when it comes to shatnez, you have wool and linen. It may represent chesed and gevura, and they may seem to be side by side. But since when it comes to outside of holiness, each one has its own identity and its own interests and ambition, therefore they will be constantly in a state of conflict and strife, and therefore it is something that's forbidden. If we talk about the hybrid animals over there, there's nothing to talk about. Yes, you may say, well, it's unity, it's become one, but not to the purpose and to the destiny, what's meant for each person. Each person has their purpose, they have their mission to take two entities and transform it into a third alien hybrid. That undermines the very intent of what Hashem created in the world. However, as we mentioned, when it comes to Bigdei Kahuna, when it comes to tzitzis, over there's a special dispensation, and we say there shatnez is permitted. Why is that? As we mentioned, because wool and linen outside the realm of holiness, chesed and gvura, are mutually exclusive. But if it's in the realm of holiness, when we're serving Hashem, whether it's a mitzvah of tzitzis or serving in the Beis Hamikdash, now the chesed and gvura, we come to the realization that there's something greater. Chesed and gevura are now motivated by a higher aspiration, by a higher ideal. And now they could come to realize that just like I need to serve Hashem and you need to serve Hashem, we could get along. If you have different people in the office, everyone has their task and mission. But they all realize that they need to contribute to the bottom line of the company. And therefore, even though they have a different task, they should not try to undermine the other and to try to one-up the other, because at the end of the day, what do you gain? If you're going to undermine that other person, yes, you may get a step, you think you're getting a step ahead, but at the end of the day, everyone is losing out. And that's why specifically in those instances, in the Beis HaMikdash and in the instance of tzitzis, the kilayim, the shatnez would be permitted, but outside of Kedusha, it would not be permitted. There is one difference, and that is basar b'chalav, which is very, very interesting. As we asked before, if we were to compare the mixture of milk and meat, is that more similar to the case of a hybrid animal, where it's mixed up and it's become a totally different thing? Or is it similar to shatnez, where you have wool and linen next to each other? So the Rebbe explains an interesting thing. When it comes to the case of shatnez, the Torah specifically tells us, or at least our sages teach us, extrapolated the Talmud, that generally speaking, shatnez is prohibited, but there's a special dispensation in tzitzis and when we serve in the Beis HaMikdash. However, when it comes to the hybrid animals or the hybrid of the seeds. Again, this is something that there is no dispensation. To have an alien kind of, a new kind of fruit or a new kind of animal, there is no scenario where the Torah would permit it. How about mixture of milk and meat? So it's interesting because in the Parsha of Mishpatim, in one pasuk it says that Reishis Bikurei Ad Mascha, it is the first ripening of your what's being grown from your land. Tavi Beis Hashem Lekecha, you should bring to the Beis Hamikdash. Lo Savash Al Gdi Bach Levima, you should not cook the kid in the mother's milk. So there's an interesting juxtaposition over here. We have, on the one hand, the Torah is saying is bring Bikurim to the Beis Hamikdash, don't have milk and meat. What's the correlation? So the Midrash tells us that people would think maybe, generally speaking, I'm not allowed to have milk and meat outside the temple, but if it's in the temple, if it's an offering, we could bring milk and meat. So the Torah tells us that's why we juxtapose, we bring together these two in the same verse, that even though you have to bring Bikurim to the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to, even in the Beis Hamikdash, have milk and meat. Which the Rebbe says, it seems like it's a middle stage. When it comes to shatnez, the Torah gives us a special exemption if it's in the Beis Hamikdash. When it comes to the hybrid animals, there is no dispensation. There's no case where it's permitted. By Basar B'chalav, we at least entertain the notion. We say maybe it should be permitted, and in the end we say it's forbidden. The Rebbe says because the Basar B'chalav is an in-between. When it comes to the hybrid animals, these two forces, whether it's the seeds, whether it's the two animals, have so thoroughly integrated one with the other that the very essence, the reproductive powers have been unified, have fused together. These two have literally become one. And therefore, this undermines, as we mentioned, the very essence of what Hashem intended, that each person and entity and object and every phenomenon should have its own space, its own identity. This is forbidden. However, Basar B'chalav, on the one hand, it's not that integration it's not like the hybrid animals, but on the other hand, you can't say it's like shatnez, because shatnez, the wool and the linen are completely are even after they're woven together, they retain each its own character and its identity. You could see how each one is separate. The Basar B'chalav, there has been some chemical change. When you cook milk and meat together, on a molecular level, something has changed. So therefore, on the one hand, the Torah says maybe it should be, we entertain the notion it should be different, but in the end we say it's more similar to the hybrid animals, and therefore it's forbidden even in the Beis Hamikdash. Because at the end of the day, the two have become one. However, a fascinating piece of information the Rebbe says, he brings the Bachaya, which says that when Mashiach will come, Basar B'chalav, milk and meat, will become permitted. He also adds, it's also brought down that when Mashiach comes, the Chazer, the Chazer will also be permitted. That's why it says Chazer, it will return, because even though now it's prohibited, when Mashiach comes, it will be permissible to eat. And the Rebbe explains why is Basar B'chalav, why when Mashiach comes, what's going to change that will become permitted? Because, as we said before, the unity, the fusion, the chemistry that has happened when milk and meat mix together, it's not at the very essence. When something is essentially merged and fused together, that undermines Hashem's intent of the creation of the world. Basar B'chalav has not done that. It has not penetrated to the very reproductive powers as it is in the scenario of the mixed seeds, the hybrid seeds or the hybrid animals. It is only that with our eyes, when we look at Basar B'chalav, they seem to be one. And indeed, that's what we go by, and that's why the Torah says it's prohibited. When Mashiach comes, it says, V'ro kol basar yachdav, that every single person will see the true essence and nature of everything. We will not see the way things are just from the physical veneer. We'll be able to see the essence of everything. We'll be able to see Hashem. Every person will be conscious of a reality where Hashem and His presence pervades everything in this world. We'll be able to see the true nature of everything. We'll be able to see how basar and chalav, when they are cooked together, yes, it may appear to be one, but truly they have not fused and obliterated the boundary, the milk and of the meat. And therefore, when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to appreciate how, even though they're connected, since they are living harmoniously, in the era of Mashiach, will be something that'll be permitted. I just want to circle back and take a step back and try to glean out of all of this, what is the lesson? We have explored the different kinds of forbidden mixtures that the Torah talks about. But on a general level, what do we see from all of this? Number one, the mixture of different kingdoms. Mixing the domim with its someach and the chai, the various entities that are from the realm and kingdom of the inanimate, of the vegetative, of the animal. Mixing them together is prohibited. What does this teach us? It teaches us that everything in life has its place. The Rebbe once explained how we could see from the concept of shatnez, which you're mixing that from the animal, from the inanimate and the vegetative kingdom, the domim and the tzomeach, the tzomeach and chai, the wool which comes from the realm of from sheep, from the animal, and the flax, the linen which comes from the flax, which is vegetative, mixing the two. The Rebbe says, what's the idea behind this? There's different stages in life, as we know. Starting from the domim, from the inanimate to the vegetative and the animal, it's progressively higher in the state of consciousness and sensitivity to reality. In life, we start off when we're younger and we try to inspire children to serve Hashem and develop a relationship. As they are young and immature, we need to give them all kinds of incentives, and whether it's prizes, toys, treats. But as we progress and we mature, we come to realize that our relationship with Hashem should not be based on incentive, but realize that the relationship itself is the incentive. When we progress to a higher stage, we are not allowed to mix. When you graduate from the level of tzomeach to chai, you can't go back and live in your youth and your innocence and try to lean on that past. When you're in the realm in the stage of someach, that is where you belong. But when you progress and promote and graduate to chai in the animal kingdom, that's where you belong as well. That's one of the lessons the Rebbe spoke about. He also spoke about how in the Torah we see there's mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lo aseh. There's the positive commandments and there's the negative prohibitions. And each one has its place. And therefore we have to know, and just like in the forbidden mixture, you have chesed, you have gvura, you have kindness and outreach and caring and giving, and gvura, which is restraint and judgment and severity. Each one has its place. There are those that we need to embrace, and there are those that we need to reject. And we have to know each one from what it is. And those who we need to embrace, we should not reject. Those we need to reject, we should not embrace. But what is one of the overriding lessons that the overarching theme, you could say, that we see from this, that each thing, whether it's domain, someach, chai, which kingdom it is, which realm it is, kindness, severity, different species, animals, we should not mix them together. What does that teach us? Everything in life has its beauty, has its purpose, has its destiny. Our attempt to mix things together and to live in different realities is something that the Torah tells us to stay away from. We need to appreciate that which we have. And sometimes we look at others and they have things which may spark some jealousy, some envy. We need to appreciate and embrace that which we have. And ultimately, when we come to realize that everything that we need in life, we have. Hashem has given us. And when we come to appreciate that and embrace that which we have, we will no longer look to the other side of the grass and what other people have to enrich our lives. And finally, this idea that we spoke about, what does it mean to have true unity and true relationships? This is true in marriage. It's true in workplace and business. When we seek to unite with our friends, with our spouse, it's important to realize that unity, a true relationship, is only possible when the two parties retain their true personality, their identity. And sometimes we think that the only way we could get along is if one will suspend who they are. They will nullify and really obliterate a part of their personality in order to be able to fuse together with the other person. And such a relationship, the Torah says, is not really a relationship. It's a kilayim. It's a shatnez. And it could play out in various scenarios, as we said. If both of them are goring full on, and neither one is yielding to the other, that's wool and linen. Each one retains their identity, their strength, their power, and they're relentlessly fighting with the other person. Or if each one says, you know what, you let go, I will be the dominant one. That's also unhealthy. That's also considered something that the Torah said is a forbidden mixture. The only permissible mixture the Torah says, if you want to combine the chesed and the gvura, is if each one comes to realize in this relationship that we're not here for ourselves. What could I get out of this relationship? We're here for a higher purpose. We're here to serve Hashem. We're here to build a family. We're here for raising children. We have very special ideas and projects and missions, things that we want to accomplish in life together. So then, even if one is chesed, one is gevura, they could be as polar opposites, but nevertheless, they will be able to have the peace and the harmony that is needed. So, as we begin the month of Elul, and we look to see what we could accomplish what we have accomplished in the year bygone, and we look forward to the year ahead, it's important not to look where we don't belong, try to look into other people's lives and feel that we should be doing more based on what other people are doing. We need to look into ourselves to see what are the strengths and the resources and the tools that Hashem has given us to make the most of it, and try to deepen our relationships with others, and through this we become the vessel, the receptacle for bracha, for peace. Osa Shalom ben Ramrav, who Yasa Shalom Aleinu, Hashem, who creates the environment of peace in the heavens, who Yasa Shalom Aleinu, Val Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. May it be this year we should have the Shana Tov Mesukah, each and every one of us, with health and happiness and prosperity.